All right. Hello, Shannon. If you want, you can introduce yourself and what you're running for.
Thank you, Alexandria. So my name is Shannon Childs. I am running for mayor of Denton, and yeah, sorry, I guess I won't go too much into that right now. Save time.
Let's see here. We can get right into the questions and get to know about all your good ideas. So we'll start with the first three questions are like public transit oriented. Question number one is, what is your experience with using public transit? Have you used things like Go Zone, Connect buses, or the A train?
Yeah, so transparently, right now, I do have a car, and I'm also privileged to live kind of in downtown Denton near UNT. So if I have to get somewhere far, I drive, or if I'm going downtown, I walk there, which is a great privilege. However, when I was an undergrad at UNT, I did use the bus system a bit. And in fact, in preparing for this, I was thinking back to a story of a time when I was at UNT and I was trying to get to class. I was running late. I got to UNT and there was no place to park. And I was too stubborn. I'd already paid for a parking pass. I was like, I'm not giving these people more money to park in the parking garage. And I remembered that I had a really good friend that lived in an apartment near the mall, near the Denton Mall. And right across from her apartment was a bus stop that she had told me was great. She used it all the time. And so I was like, you know what? That's what we're doing today. And so I know that's probably inconsistent with the major benefits of public transportation. But at the time, like I was like, this is what I'm gonna do. And I did it. And I remember the bus dropping me right there on campus. And I was like, I should be doing this more often. And I was thinking about how a big key piece of that story is how people who do rely on public transportation to get groceries or get to work or to class um, face all these different stressors in accessing that transportation. And so I really appreciate the work that Abundance Denton is doing, particularly in meeting the people who use public transportation where they are in order to determine what would work best for them. And so, yeah, I do appreciate the A train and connecting to Dallas. I do still do that quite frequently. And I work with so many students who rely on our bus systems and learn from the stress of it from them, especially with what we've seen lately.
Right on, right on. Well, question number two gets a little bit more into it. Um, Question number two, accessibility is a big issue in public transit. How do you plan to work with DCTA to address things like safe sidewalks, unprotected bus stops, and low route coverage, etc.?
Yeah, I tried to keep myself from going too much into the accessibility piece in that last question because I knew this was coming. And so, one of the first motivations for me when I started campaigning was recognizing that, and I know we'll talk more about this later, but that there is a growing crisis with our homeless populations. And so, in talking to them, I have recognized how the accessibility piece of transportation is something that we need to be prioritizing in order to help not just our homeless communities, but our vulnerable communities, our working families, and our people who just can't afford their own personal transportation. I think the city needs to work a lot more closely with DCTA to treat accessibility as more of a core part of the infrastructure of transportation as a whole. I know it's a cliche, but like it isn't just about the destination, it is about the journey. And I think that we have to, like I said a second ago, talk to people about what they need, because what people need and the ways to access our transportation may not line up with the metrics that we're seeing being reported. And I also definitely don't think that people's personal experience lines up with us just looking at a picture of a map. I think it involves that lived real experience. And I'm so sorry, I will keep my other answers shorter, but I just have to tell you that a couple weeks ago, it occurred to me that our Daily Bread homeless shelter is on one side of 288 and Serve Denton is on the other. Historically, there may not have been a lot of need for people from our homeless shelter to go to Serve Denton for certain resources. A lot of those needs are met at the shelter. However, Serve Denton is growing and expanding, and they now offer counseling, job coaching, financial planning, and a number of other different services that once you are working towards gaining your mental health clarity, working towards thriving, not just surviving, these services can be incredibly impactful. And so I thought to myself, I wonder how long it takes to get from our Daily Bread to Serve Denton if you walk there. And I have only been to our like Daily Bread a couple of times, so I was too hesitant to park there. So I parked at Serve Denton, kind of did the experiment, the opposite route. Either way, it would have come to the same conclusion. And so when I started that walk, I realized that in order to get to the other side, I would have either had to cross 6 to 8 lanes of traffic if there's a turn lane, or you have to walk essentially all the way down 288 to McKinney Street, which is what I did. By the end of it, it took me about 45 minutes, and I'm a physically healthy person. I'm a mentally healthy person, and I have a lot of privilege going for me that someone who is homeless does not have. And that whole time, don't get me wrong, I know that there is a bus stop over there, but that whole time I was walking, I did not see a bus and I did not see a bus stop. And to me, that is a key problem because if we are wanting our community to build and grow and thrive, we have to make things like that accessible to people. And so to me, transportation and accessibility are hand in hand.
I actually love that call out. That's a really good one. Let's see. Our next question, question number 3. Dentonites have said that GoZone is inefficient, unreliable, and uncomfortable. How does GoZone factor into your plans for transit improvement?
Yes, I have heard these concerns from people in our homeless communities, working families, students, and I will say I don't want to push back because I agree. I think there's a concern. I travel around, I see Go Zone stopping in the right in front of me sometimes when I'm driving down the street, and I'm like, huh. I don't necessarily know that that's a Go Zone problem as opposed to like where can we intervene and help drivers feel more comfortable in Denton and get the Denton vibe while driving. However, I also don't think that Go Zone should be what we're relying on. I think we need to increase buses and bus routes, and that Go Zone should be more of a gap filler instead of the first main option. And talking to people who have had to rely on Go Zone, there's often incredibly long wait times if you can even track one down. And I also just think that if this is something we are really going to closely look at, in my opinion, if GoZone has to exist, we need to figure out a way to work together and make it free because it's not really benefiting anyone in the way that it's existing right now, in my opinion.
Right on. Well, our next few questions kind of shift more towards housing. So, question number 4, I know we touched on this a little, but do you have any plans to expand resources for our unhoused population?
Yes. And that to me is a priority. And a reason it is a priority is because I think that there is a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding when it comes to our homeless populations. I've heard from people who, in my opinion, have a lot of privilege to be able to say, oh, there's people in Denton who want to be homeless. And I've talked to some people who have shared that sentiment. However, the people that I've spoken with have also gone through a significant amount of trauma in their lives that many of us have so much privilege that we will never be able to reconcile an experience like that. And so I think that my key first idea in order to bring more support to our homeless communities is looking at virtual telehealth types options and expanding that. Where that comes from is I worked at North Central Texas College for a very, very long time. And during that time, we implemented a service called Timely Care. And NCTC is amazing. They offered it to their part-time staff, and students have access to it, even if you're only enrolled in one single class. And how it works is you just download an app, and then you have access to free telehealth and telehealth counseling services. Now, of course, that will have a cost on the city, but to me, and in my opinion, looking at these costs now will save us down the line, because to me, the cost of people dying is not as much as trying to implement services like this. And that is something that we have seen year after year after year, is people losing their lives. And to me, if there's a cost that allows people this sort of accessibility to have those kinds of services, that needs to be a priority. And I would also love to just kind of like house something like that, not just at our homeless shelter, but in our libraries as well, places where these vulnerable communities gather and come together. I think having access to something like that would be so beneficial. The other piece of this is I have watched several city council meetings. If you're up to date, you realize our average median income is based off Dallas, not Denton's experience. And I think that that is a problem that we need to approach similarly, almost when you think about the go zone issue. It's going beyond the metrics and looking at what people in residents in Denton actually need. And so some ideas I have to approach that are prioritizing community land trust, building stronger tenant protections, and making sure that people know their rights by supporting tenant unions and tenant organizing. We learned recently that there is potentially the option for city council to also implement rent controls for ADUs. So even though there's caps on apartment complexes, perhaps there's some wiggle room there that we can start to implement ways to not price people out of Denton. I fear that more of these like large scale apartments, I'm not gonna lie, not only are they ugly, but they detract from like the artistic and creative value that Denton offers to people. And I certainly will never be convinced that they're lowering our current rental rates. I think there were a couple that got built right as I moved into an apartment near UNT. That same year, my rent increased by like $300. So I'm just like, there's a disconnect, and doing more of this isn't resolving it. And I think we also need to be prioritizing making housing available closer to where people need it, whether that's the universities, workspaces, things like that. Those are things that I would like to take a look at. And that's also something I really welcome community input and collaboration on when it comes to solving.
Hmm. Well, this next question kind of goes deeper into that. I know we've talked about some of it, but for question number 5, rent continues to increase to absurd levels here in Denton. How would you address this issue if you wanted to go more into that?
Yeah, so for me, I think this really comes down to the people we're prioritizing when we make these decisions as a city. I want us to be focused on the people who are already living here, who are already building lives here. To me, that doesn't just include families, but it also includes working single folks and our student populations. I think that we also need to, kind of like I alluded to earlier, be mindful of the artistic sense of culture that kind of radiates throughout Denton. I think that growth is somewhat inevitable, but I don't think that it should be at the cost of folks who are already building their lives here. And so to me, because of those reasons, it's important that we're intentional about the kinds of housing and transportation that we're building. And yeah, what we're encouraging. I in doing work at Texas Women's University, I think not that many people are aware that TWU actually has a branch of off-campus housing that is kind of like just randomly off of like Teasley. And I, people can argue with me, but it's essentially a food desert. And so these students that are living there are having to rely on their personal modes of transportation or bus systems to access ways to go to the grocery store, appointments, class. And so I think we have to be mindful and look at long-term solutions, including things like community-based housing needs, things like that.
Right on. Let's see. Our last question is a cost of living question. So to close us out, question number 6. People in Denton struggle to afford cost of living such as transportation, housing, groceries, etc. What do you hope to see the city do to make living here more affordable?
Yeah, I kind of got ahead of myself there, huh? But I also think that along with some of the things we've already talked about here today,
Hmm.
key pieces of this comes down to making sure that there are better networks of ways to connect people to community resources. I alluded to this earlier, but there are so many different organizations in Denton that want to help people. And the city should be a key part of that. Don't get me wrong. And that is something that I would hope to bring to the city as the mayor. It is a prioritization of this sort of collaboration. And I think that if we can get creative, you use our artists, our filmmakers, our people who maybe contribute to our community in non-traditional types of ways, even like our bartenders, our librarians. Like I want their input on the experiences that they're having with the people who live in Denton. And I think by bridging those gaps, making sure that all of these different networks are aware of all of these different resources, we can really start to work towards that and making sure that people understand that there are food pantries, there are low cost or even free counseling resources, and that it doesn't necessarily have to cost the city a ton of money to make sure that we are, like I've been saying, giving people the opportunity to thrive. To me, affordability isn't just about being able to buy or what are the words I'm trying to say? But it's not just about what you can buy, but it's how you're able to live your life and how living your life with the freedom of not having to have some of these financial stressors allows you to contribute and give back to your community, which is all I'm trying to do right now.
I love that so much. Right on. This was all really awesome, good stuff. Is there anything else that you want to tell people? And also, where can people find you or information about your campaign or anything like that?
Yeah. So Shannon Childs, add me on Facebook. That's my big spot. I am on Instagram. My username is Cupcakes and Elephants. I don't really use that for politics as frequently as Facebook. That has, to me, has been a key way to connect with Denton because Denton's on Facebook. And so I do just kind of want to add that I um appreciate Abundance Denton and what Abundance Denton is doing, because I think that anyone running to be an elected leader should have a positive abundance mindset. You have to, in order to believe that there are potentials for change and growth in your community. And I think sometimes we think of abundance as something that is material, but it doesn't have to be. It's community. It's coming together and building each other up. And to me, that's what city leadership should be about. It should be about cooperation and collaboration. And yes, I'm sorry, I have so much more I could say, but I will cut myself off.
That is perfectly fine. We can always link your Facebook page and all that below anywhere we post these videos. And also thank you for that. I really appreciate that. I always tell people when I'm meeting them and telling them about Abundance Denton that we are just a group of regular community members who care about people who live in Denton. And it feels like you align with that. So thank you so much for taking the time out to answer these questions for us. Yeah, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Awesome. Thank you, Alexandria. Thank y'all for putting these questions together and talking to everyone. That's awesome.
For sure.